You might call it The French Revolution Goes Digital. The Lady and the Duke, the latest film from new wave master Éric Rohmer, uses new digital imaging not for elaborate special effects, but to recreate the visual culture of the French Revolution. The story concerns a Scottish aristocrat whose French lover is involved in perilous revolutionary politics. If cinema had been around to capture the chaos of France in the 1790s, says the New York Times, one imagines it would have looked something like this. Canape takes a guided tour of an 18th century world, rendered by 21st century technology.
The story of the movie is, it's based on a real-life story. I mean, everything that is in the movie is taken from the memoirs of this Englishwoman, who I play, called Grace Elliott, who lived in Paris during the Revolution, and particularly during the period that was the Terror. She was asked by the king, basically, to write down her memoirs, because she had been the mistress of the Duke of Orleans, who was the first cousin of the French king, who was a very good friend. When the film starts, they're already ex-lovers, so they have a sort of a wonderful friendship. They completely disagree with each other over everything political you can think about, but they have a tremendous sort of fondness for each other, so this is part of the story.
Je respecte votre affection pour une monarchie qui ne la mérite pas. Mais je n'en veux à personne au sujet de ses opinions sur la Révolution. Mais je désire qu'on fasse de même pour moi. Mais d'un côté comme de l'autre, on n'a pas ma tolérance, hélas. Grâce, je vous conjure, rentrez dans votre pays. Il est temps encore. Je crains que les événements ne se précipitent. Je vous aime. Je ne veux pas vous voir en péril. Votre absence me sera cruelle, mais partez.
Tant que je pourrai voir la reine, ne serait-ce que de temps en temps, je crois que mon devoir est de rester ici.
And she was an extraordinary woman. She came from a very privileged background. I think sort of, you know, at times she's a fairly irritating person. But when she found herself in this situation, this terrifying situation, she rose to the challenge. She decided to do what she thought was right.
Vous respirez?
Oui, mais j'ai chaud.
Dieu, on vient. Toute la troupe est arrivée. Les officiers municipaux veulent voir madame. Qu'ils entrent? Qu'ils fouillent. Je n'ai rien à cacher. Madame ne se lève pas? Non, je suis trop lasse. Eh bien, venez! Qu'y a-t-il?
Perquisition, citoyenne.
I think she's remarkable. But when I read the book at the same time, I could just recognize so many English women. There's something about her, well, I mean, her arrogance and her stubbornness. It's like, no, I'm going to do this because I've said I will. First, sort of became involved in a very prosaic manner. I answered an advertisement. Luckily for me, Éric Rohmer is someone who spends an enormous amount of time on his casting. For him, it's very, very important to find the right people. Once he's got them, he then gives them complete confidence and says, off you go. When I knew that he wanted to see me, I was actually working in a bank in London to sort of, just after I left drama school, to sort of pay off debts and things. And I got off the phone, the casting director had phoned me, and I was obviously quite excited. I was put the phone down, sort of trying not to sit there going, yeah! Because it's not what you do in the middle of a bank. Sorry about the sound. And my direct boss within this small area of the bank said, what's happened? And I said, I sent off this advertisement for this French director, and they want to see me. And he said, oh, what director? And I said, Éric Rohmer. And the guy goes, he's my favorite director. My wife and I have loved him since the 70s. We have so many of his videos. And I was like, I mean, how you know, likely is that, frankly.
Although Claude Simon won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1985, it failed to make him a household name. Now Americans have another chance to catch up with the 88-year-old author whose key theme is memory. His two most recent novels, The Jardin des Plantes and The Trolley, are out in superb English translations. Simon's scholar and friend, Professor Tom Bishop, talks to Canape about the pleasures of reading the heir to William Faulkner and Marcel Proust.
Claude Simon is, I think, one of the really great figures, but probably not recognized as such by a large part of the French reading public, but really one of the great writers of the second half of the 20th century, without a doubt, maybe the greatest. He began writing in the 50s, late 40s and 50s, and has written many novels which have all had great critical successes, but never sold very much until he won the Nobel Prize. Now, the awarding of the Nobel Prize, I believe in 1985, his sales were always very modest. He is one of the writers. Claude Simon is nearing 90. He's an amazing man. He has a lot of energy. Some of his books, notably The Flanders Road, is about as good as it gets when it comes to 20th century writing. It is about a defeat in Flanders in 1940 when France was defeated by the Germans. It becomes the key moment, the defining moment of his whole life. In Claude Simon, it's about memory more than anything else. He writes about memory and he writes about writing, and the two are indissociable. Writing and memory go hand in hand. He is above all a writer who believes in the fragmentation of memory, in the fragmentation of time, and therefore in a non-narrative fragmented book. One of his many brilliant books, called Conducting Les Corps Conducteurs in French, Conducting Bodies in English, by an art publisher, and it was filled with illustrations and especially a preface. At the beginning of this preface there is a drawing, a pen drawing of himself sitting at his desk writing. So the self-reflexive form of his writing is already illustrated in that painting, in that drawing. And then later on there's a little scribble, a little bit of a thing that he draws. It's a strange line, a curved line that meanders and gets nowhere. It's like a knot. That is for him how he writes, how the narrative fiction functions and how memory functions in a way which is anything but linear. And of course, if we think about it, that's how our memory works. Nothing works for us in the linear fashion. Only 19th century novels work in linear fashions, and everything else is fragmented. Our experience of life is fragmented, and so is what we get out of his novels. We are very lucky because two of his books have just been published. The one called The Jardin des Plantes and the other called The Trolley. Now, The Trolley is his most recent book. It appeared in France, I think a year or two ago, written at the age of 88, which is not bad. It's about a trolley, and the trolley that the narrator, who is clearly Claude Simon, experienced as a child. He went to school in this trolley, and now as an old man he rides the same trolley. There is a superimposition of experience that is so rich, so beautiful, and so available. The Jardin des Plantes, which is a longer book, perhaps a somewhat more difficult book, and a book which has the typography set up in a way on the page which force you to read it in a fragmented way. That is, you have little boxes, and they are separate. They talk about different narratives. There is a page which is cut, slashed down in the middle, and you read it in two halves. Most of our news magazines now are printed in the same way, and you read Time magazine or New York magazine or things like that, and you read a column and then you read the next column. Now they're all over the place. Well, so is this book. Why? Because, again, because he is trying to reproduce that fragmentation, that simultaneity, which our experience of life is, and which our experience of the past is.
If today an American wants to know something about French fashion, it's a click away on the internet. Such was not the case in the 18th century, when American colonials began to look to France for a sense of what would bring European style and elegance to their side of the Atlantic. A recent exhibit at the Wadsworth Atheneum Museum of Art in Hartford, Connecticut, explores the American love affair with French fashion over a 200-year period. Curator Carol Crute tells Canape about how the city of Paris has been a dress shop always open to Americans.
The art of French fashion at the Wadsworth Atheneum Museum of Art starts with a couple from the 18th century and runs to 1937 with a brand new Chanel that we just purchased, actually. Most of the clothes were donated, with the exception of the Chanel. The 18th century gown we purchased in memory of our very first curator, Mrs. Paul Berger. In America, the 18th century, we were just beginning to grow culturally as a nation, but we really didn't have anything of our own, and the wealthy could afford to look to France, not so much for finished gowns, but as for the fabulous materials and things that were imported, especially through the ports of Boston. So we have a lot of wonderful things here in the museum. Fabrics literally made the dress. The garments at that time were put together very loosely because fashion changed very quickly, and Americans were eager, hungry to be able to know what was new. So the clothes, even in France, were loosely basted together so that if in 6 weeks the Queen wore something else, they could quickly rearrange their clothes to suit the latest mode. What happened in the 1860s was actually the people from this area, our donors, were going to Paris to buy their clothes. They were not dependent on clothes coming to them. We are still in the era where a woman would go to a dressmaker and have one dress made just for her. It was true couture. Copies were being made here as fast as the Americans could bring them home. The American dressmakers were copying what they saw coming from France. But what was coming from France, in the exhibition, we actually have 2 dresses from 2 different French dressmakers made for one woman. And because the first one is 10 years earlier than the other, the first is 1867, you can see she was still a young girl from the body type. And then 10 years later, she's back in Paris, and she probably was all 10 years in between buying her wardrobes. The next big step, the thing that changed really was an Englishman who was the first, as they say, French couturier, and that was Charles Frederick Worth. And he actually attracted vast numbers of Americans to Paris. One, they were very comfortable with his language, but Worth had a huge capacity for turning out what I would really call today mass production, even though his prices were certainly nothing approaching mass produced. He instituted a series of what I would call separates. He designed maybe 100 bodices and 100 skirts. Now, with permutations and combinations, you have enough to clothe all of Paris and never come up with the same design twice. I wanted to point out that there are really 2 things I think that make French fashion, especially of this period that we've covered, totally extraordinary. First, it is the apprentice system, working her way from picking up pins. And the other is the reliance on great artisans. That here in the States, we've never really valued that kind of craft work the way they do in France. And if a designer or a dressmaker or a couturier, whatever you want to call them, needs something in particular, they can go out and find a mom and pop store still today and get something made for themselves. I come from the rag trade, and I know darn well, if you can use that word, that you have to buy what they make. You cannot really ask for something special because we're geared towards mass production. And I think the French, especially in the couture, are still geared to a one-on-one.
Some authors find a style and stay there. Others explore. François Dominique keeps company with the explorers. Trained as a scholar of law and political science, he creates fictional worlds that move sinuously across the frontiers of prose and poetry. On a recent lecture tour of the United States, he stopped to talk with Canape about the writer's craft in a rapidly changing world and about his work in France as a publisher and translator of American poetry.
Mon travail par rapport à la poésie américaine est double. C'est d'abord un travail d'éditeur, de poètes américains qui n'étaient pas traduits en français au moment où je les ai publiés, mais c'est aussi un travail de traduction. La forme et le fond ne peuvent pas être une chose différente, parce que la poésie, c'est d'abord la voix, donc c'est la matière du son. Comment retrouver la matière du son dans le livre? Eh bien, avec une matière visible et tactile. Et c'est pourquoi, et je ne suis pas le seul à faire ça, je crois que depuis que l'édition de poésie existe, il y a toujours eu des gens qui ont cherché à soigner la forme. Donc, le papier est très important. Donc, la typographie est très importante. Donc, le choix des couleurs, le format sont importants. J'ai commencé, comme je vous le disais tout à l'heure, il y a 5 ans, la traduction du chef-d'œuvre de Louis Zukowski, qui s'appelle A, la première lettre de l'alphabet, qui est The Poem of a Life, le poème d'une vie entière, qui commence dans sa jeunesse, qui s'arrête à la fin de sa vie. Et ce poème entrecroise justement de nombreuses voix. On entend les bruits des villes, les sorties du théâtre, le train, les concerts, la vie publique qui vient s'exposer sur la scène du poème. Ça m'a fasciné. Chaque fois que je prends mon stylo ou l'ordinateur pour écrire, j'essaye de... Je ne le fais pas si je ne suis pas étonné. J'ai besoin d'être absolument étonné par la langue qui est naturellement la mienne. Pour citer une phrase que m'a dite Yves Bonnefoy, le poète français Yves Bonnefoy, il m'a dit qu'à son avis, ce que j'avais écrit avant mon dernier livre, Paroles données, était comme une chrysalide. Vous voyez l'image de la chrysalide, c'est-à-dire quelque chose dont je n'avais pas tout à fait conscience, mais qui était certainement obsessionnel, et qui prend une forme dans mon dernier livre, Paroles données, c'est-à-dire redonner une voix à une enfant disparue. C'est un épisode de ma propre enfance, à une fille disparue, et une muette. Et tout ce travail autour de la voix, des voix disparues, des voix perdues, je peux dire maintenant que c'est mon travail depuis 15 ans. Et dans le cas de mon histoire particulière, la connaissance tragique d'une fille muette qui avait 13-14 ans quand j'avais le même âge a été certainement l'origine de l'écriture. Et donc je n'arrête pas, finalement, dans chaque texte que j'écris, de rendre un hommage à cette voix perdue pour donner une voix à celle qu'il a 2 fois perdue, comme enfant muette, et également comme personne disparue, comme personne morte.
It's a long way from rural Haiti to singing for the 1998 Goodwill Games. But that's the trajectory of the multi-talented singer, chant artist, producer, composer, Earthman, a pioneer of the dance music known as house. He draws from a global range of styles that includes such outposts of francophonie as Haiti and Tunisia. He also feels that artists must give back to the world from which they draw their materials. The passionate young artist chats with Canape about how philanthropy should be a part of global pop music.
When I started, it was 84, 85. I didn't know what I was doing. At that point, house music didn't exist. I just went into the studio and started creating a whole sound, a drum program. And then from that point on, I was considered a pioneer of the whole house music movement. And then I did a record called Yo, What This Party Started, Right? Which became a huge record and did like 1 million copies. From that point on, I went around the world touring, which what helped me, actually led me to Tunisia, which is where I learned about the chanting and stuff like that. They called me Earthman, and the name was given to me when I was in Tunisia. And they gave me the name because when I went out there, I got into a chanting circle, and I started chanting with them. And my vocals was reaching some incredible octaves, and one of the Tunisians called me Earthman. A lot of the music that I'm singing, my mother is one of my biggest influences, and stuff that I heard when I was small. When I was really tiny, I heard in the mountains, mountain men singing in Haiti. And that was like, that you could, actually when I sing, people say they could hear that in my music. I like to mix my music. My music has symphony in it. I put score, symphony, I put drum programs, loops. I do all kinds of interesting things. Very different, you know. I'm not really the traditional follow the pattern of how music is supposed to be to fit to the world, you know, for it to sell. I do what I feel from inside my heart. Something happened to me one time. I wasn't riding in the Long Island Railroad. I fell out. I died. The experience I had was a dark pitch area, and I felt like I spoke to God. And it kind of, and from that space, my life shifted because He guided me and gave me a higher understanding about life. And from then, Earthman and everything else I'm doing became in a very spiritual space. Singing in New York, I think New York is now creating itself over. They're reaching a higher spirituality. Now a lot of people are looking for music that really touches them inside. So I built a company called Earth Voice Music. And what we do is 20% of the company is going to different children foundation. I mean, that's one of the things that really light me up is children. Since I have the ability to create music that does really well, I said to myself, why not give 20% of different foundations to make a difference? Because I mean, if you're living, I believe you should be living, making a difference. putting together a group, bigger symphony. I want a full violin, and probably put a DJ on stage playing beats behind it with the chanting that I do underneath it. That's my goal. My ultimate goal is to have a whole symphony that I could just chant, and with kind of with rock and roll guitar mixed into it, just a whole mixture of just new stuff. I mean, that would be that, and I would want to travel all over Europe to let them show, just to let them see the whole Earthman experience.